The rhythmic thud of Arthur Pendleton's hammer echoed across the ridge of the Bitterroot Mountains, a sound that quickly became the ultimate annoyance to his three neighbors. Arthur's property was an anomaly. Decades ago, his grandfather had built 4 modest, sturdy cabins on a single, sprawling 5-acre plot, originally intended for a logging crew. Over the years, the plot was subdivided. Arthur kept the central, largest cabin, while the other 3 were sold off. By the summer of 2023, the adjacent cabins were occupied by an eclectic mix of modern mountaineers. To the east lived Nathaniel and Sarah Henderson, a pair of remote tech workers from Seattle who had moved to the mountains for the unplugged lifestyle while remaining heavily dependent on their smart home ecosystem. To the west were Greg and Susan Miller, retirees who spent their days manicuring their gravel driveway and complaining about the pine needles. To the south sat Liam and Chloe Caldwell, a young couple whose primary source of income seemed to be taking aesthetic photographs of their pour-over coffee against the backdrop of the rugged peaks. None of them understood Arthur. A retired machinist with grease permanently etched into the lines of his knuckles, Arthur was quiet, solitary, and largely ignored until he began the project. In late August, lumber trucks arrived. Arthur began constructing enclosed, heavily insulated breezeways, essentially above-ground tunnels, connecting the front porch of his central cabin to the side doors of the Henderson, Miller, and Caldwell homes. The backlash was immediate. "It's an eyesore," Greg Miller complained over the fence, leaning on his rake. "You're building a rat highway, Artie. It's going to ruin the property values." Liam Caldwell took to his social media, posting a picture of the corrugated steel and reclaimed timber framing with the caption, "When your neighbor goes full doomsday prepper and ruins the mountain aesthetic." But the fiercest opposition came from Nathaniel Henderson. Nathaniel, who liked order and property lines clearly delineated, confronted Arthur on a crisp October morning. "Arthur, you can't just attach a structure to my house without permission," Nathaniel snapped, sipping from a Yeti thermos. Arthur didn't stop drilling. "The deed says, I retain a 5-foot easement to the original logging doors. I'm just enclosing the easement. Winter is going to be bad this year, Nathaniel. The Farmer's Almanac says so. The animals are acting strange. I don't care about the squirrels, Arthur. I'm calling the county," Nathaniel threatened. And he did. 2 days later, a county inspector's truck rumbled up the dirt road. The neighbors watched with smug satisfaction from their respective windows. However, the truck left an hour later, and Arthur resumed hammering. He had legally classified the tunnels as agricultural storage extensions, paid a nominal fee, and found a loophole that left the neighbors fuming. By November, the tunnels were finished. Inside, Arthur had installed strange, galvanized ductwork along the ceiling of the breezeways, running from his cabin to the outer walls of the others. He spent the rest of the autumn chopping wood, seasoned oak, hickory, and birch, stacking 10 massive cords against his back wall. The neighbors shunned him. The Hendersons installed security cameras pointed at the tunnel entrance. The Millers pretended Arthur didn't exist. Then came the second week of January. Meteorologists didn't just call it a storm, they called it a historic bomb cyclone. It hit the Bitterroot Range with a ferocity unseen in 40 years. The sky turned a bruised, violent purple before unloading 48 inches of snow in less than 2 days. The wind howled at 70 miles per hour, snapping mature pine trees like toothpicks. On the first night, the regional power grid collapsed. Transformers blew in a cascade of eerie blue flashes across the valley. At first, the neighbors were confident. The Hendersons had a backup generator. The Millers had a propane heating system. The Caldwells had an expensive, modern pellet stove. But nature is uncompromisingly cruel to the unprepared. By day 3, the temperature plummeted to 22 degrees below zero. The Hendersons' generator, overworked and undermaintained, seized up and died. The Millers realized too late that their propane company hadn't made the scheduled pre-winter delivery. Their tank ran dry. The Caldwell's pellet stove required a small amount of electricity to run its auger and exhaust fan, rendering it completely useless. By day 4, panic set in. The roads were buried under 6-foot snowdrifts. Emergency services announced over battery-powered radios that they could not reach anyone outside the main town limits for at least a week. Inside the Henderson cabin, The temperature was a fatal 30 degrees. Sarah was huddled under 4 down comforters with their 2 children, their lips tinged blue. Every breath materialized as a thick white cloud in the living room. Nathaniel, desperate and shivering violently, knew they wouldn't survive another night. He put on his frozen boots, intending to trek through the blizzard to find help. He opened his side door, expecting a wall of deadly wind and snow. Instead, he stepped into Arthur's tunnel. It wasn't just completely devoid of snow. It was miraculously, unimaginably warm. The air inside the insulated breezeway hovered around 60 degrees. Bewildered, Nathaniel hurried down the dimly lit corridor toward Arthur's cabin. When he pushed open the connecting door, he stopped dead in his tracks. The Millers and the Caldwells were already there. Arthur's living room was sweltering. At the center of the cabin stood a massive, custom-built soapstone masonry heater. It was a beast of a wood stove, designed to capture and radiate heat for hours. Arthur was calmly feeding a thick log of hickory into the firebox. Susan Miller was crying softly, holding a mug of tea. Liam Caldwell looked pale and humbled, sitting on the floor with his wife. "Close the door, Nathaniel. You're letting the draft in," Arthur said gruffly, not looking up. "Arthur," Nathaniel stammered, his teeth chattering. "My family. My kids are freezing." "Bring them through," Arthur replied simply. Within 10 minutes, the Hendersons were settled on Arthur's sprawling rug, soaking in the life-saving heat. But the real surprise came an hour later. Arthur stood up, grabbed a heavy iron wrench, and walked over to a series of levers on the wall next to the masonry heater. He pulled them down. A deep, rushing sound echoed through the ceiling. "What did you just do?" Greg Miller asked, his voice entirely devoid of its usual arrogance. "Open the baffles," Arthur said, tossing the wrench onto a workbench. "This stove is fitted with a thermal convection heat exchange system. Those ugly, galvanized pipes in the tunnels, they're pulling the excess heat from this firebox and forcing it into the ductwork of your cabins." Nathaniel stared at him. "You're heating our houses? I'm keeping your pipes from bursting and your drywall from cracking," Arthur corrected him, sitting back down in his worn leather recliner. "The ambient temperature in your homes should climb to about 55 degrees within the hour. You can sleep in your own beds tonight, but the tunnels stay open. You'll come here to eat. I've got enough canned goods and venison to last us a month." For the next 9 days, the 4 families lived entirely off Arthur's foresight. They stayed warm on Arthur's wood. They ate Arthur's food. The tunnels, once a source of mockery, became the arteries of their survival. They spent their days in Arthur's living room, playing cards, sharing stories, and keeping the fire fed. The sheer, overwhelming guilt began to eat at Nathaniel. On the 7th night, while the others were asleep in their moderately warmed cabins, Nathaniel stayed behind in Arthur's living room. Arthur was awake, whittling a piece of pine. "Arthur," Nathaniel whispered, staring into the glowing embers. "I need to tell you something. I'm the one who called the county on you. I tried to get your tunnels torn down." Arthur didn't stop carving. "I know, Nathaniel." Nathaniel blinked. "You knew? And you still let us in? You still built the heating pipes?" Arthur finally put the knife down. He looked at Nathaniel, and for the first time, Nathaniel noticed how incredibly frail the older man looked. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow. "I didn't build it for me, Nathaniel," Arthur said quietly. "And I didn't build it for you." Arthur sighed, leaning back. "I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave me 6 months, back in July. I'm running on borrowed time." Nathaniel felt the blood drain from his face. "I have a daughter," Arthur continued, his voice barely a rasp. "Her name is Stella. She's 32. She has severe autism, and she currently lives in an assisted facility in Boise. When I'm gone, this cabin and the land goes to her. The trust will provide a caretaker, but a caretaker is an employee, not a neighbor." Arthur looked directly into Nathaniel's eyes. "I knew this winter would be brutal. I knew none of you were ready. I built those tunnels and that heating system so that when the worst happened, you would have to rely on my home, on my wood. I wanted to prove to you that this property is the heart of this ridge." Nathaniel was speechless, a lump forming in his throat as the profound weight of Arthur's manipulation. a manipulation born entirely of a father's desperate love washed over him. "When I die," Arthur said, turning his gaze back to the fire, "the deed stipulates that the heating system, the tunnels, and the wood supply remain available to all three of your cabins. Forever. You get free heat, free security, but the condition of the easement is that you maintain the woodpile. And that you look out for Stella. You make sure the caretaker is doing their job. You make sure she isn't lonely." Tears spilled over Nathaniel's eyelashes. He reached out and grasped Arthur's calloused, grease-stained hand. "I promise, Arthur. I swear to God. We will take care of her." The storm finally broke on the 11th day. Snowplows broke through the drifts a day later, bringing the hum of generators and the return of the power grid. Life in the Bitterroot Mountains slowly returned to normal, but Arthur Pendleton didn't live to see the snow melt. He passed away quietly in his sleep 3 weeks later, the warmth of the masonry heater still radiating through the cabin. The funeral was small, held in the valley below, but the 3 neighbor families were in the front row. Today, if you drive up the winding dirt road toward the ridge, you will see 4 cabins connected by sturdy, well-maintained breezeways. You will see a young woman named Stella sitting on the front porch of the central cabin, watching the birds, safe and secure. And if you look closely, you will see Nathaniel Henderson, Greg Miller, and Liam Caldwell out in the yard, working together in the autumn chill, chopping seasoned oak and stacking it high against Arthur's back wall.